Oh, well, how lovely for everybody to join us for another episode of our podcast. And in particular, our guest this afternoon is Alison Peacock. So lovely to meet you, Alison, because I don't think our paths have crossed in real life, but I'm sure they will. And so we've also got Bob and John, as usual. And Alison, I'd like to give you a warm welcome, but also to start off by, would you like just to tell us what you do and what you're interested in and why inclusion might matter to you?
Okay, well, thank you so much for inviting me to take part. I've been a teacher all my career, and I now lead the Chartered College of Teaching. I'm inspired by children, by young people, but I'm also all of the values that I try to enact as a head teacher and a teacher when I was working are the ones that I try to live by at the Chartered College of Teaching. I'm absolutely thrilled to be working with an ever-growing community of colleagues from schools and colleges, from preschools, and I feel it's a real privilege to do the job that I do. So, and why does inclusion matter? Well, inclusion is everything as far as I'm concerned. It's about how do we make sure that we embrace the sense that learning should be lifelong, that learning is for everybody, that not everybody learns at the same pace, and that there are always new opportunities to increase the capacity for children to learn, for adults to learn. So that notion of transforming learning capacity is really at the heart of what I do. And also defying notions of so-called ability. I think all of the language that we use is really, really powerful.
Yes, it certainly is. It certainly is. And I like the idea that you brought up there, learning capacity, because I think sometimes our education system just looks at one view, one rather than narrow view of learning capacity. Would you agree?
Oh, completely. I mean, all these questions you're asking me, I could go on for half an hour.
Oh, no, please do. You don't need to. It is meant to be a conversation, Alison. It's not, you don't have to worry. Just go right ahead.
In terms of learning capacity, if as teachers we have a view that children should have the opportunity to surprise us all the time, if we keep ourselves open to the idea that children and young people can surprise us, then it also enables them to surprise themselves with what they might achieve today that they never thought they would achieve. So that notion of being on a journey, building learning capacity, is all about defying the sort of deterministic words such as potential. As soon as you use a word like potential, it sounds like it's benign, but actually it implies that there's a potential, i.e. there's a fixed amount, and once you've reached the end, that's as far as you can go. Whereas learning capacity is about saying, well, this is constant, this can always grow, it can develop in different ways. Different experiences might enable you to suddenly be able to make connections you've never made before. And so the idea that you can, or it would even be desirable to predict, measure, and put on a graph your future learning capacity, it gives the lie to it. It makes it feel much more open-ended. And to me, there's so much in education that is predicated on the view that we can reliably assess where someone is, what someone's capable of. And therefore, because we can reliably, this is how the narrative goes, we can reliably assess what someone's capable of. So therefore, we can track their progress towards that. And then we can use that tracking to not only judge the individual, but also to judge teachers and colleagues who work with that individual.
Yes.
In terms of their efficacy. And it strikes me that the first premise is a flawed one.
Yes.
And the idea that we should be judging teachers on the basis of where are you on that scale in terms of how much progress are you making, again, is a flawed concept. So, I'm all for highly ambitious opportunities. Children love challenge. They absolutely relish challenge, yes. But not challenge that's so eye-watering that they don't even know where to start. But challenge that is open-ended. That is something that I've never yet met a child who isn't kind of, intrigued and a bit sparked and wants to engage in that journey. And for me, if we can create that atmosphere in our classrooms, in our schools, with our individuals, then teachers go with it as well. And it just means that we exceed everybody's expectation.
I honestly had never thought about the difference between learning capacity and learning potential until you mentioned it there. And it's so obvious when you say it, and learning capacity is not a phrase I've heard used much. So that I do thank you for that. Have you got any examples of when a child has surprised yourself and them, you know?
Yes, I've got so many. I mean, there are examples that I share. I quite often engage in public speaking because I really want to help people to think about the job they're doing and to be inspired by the job they're doing. And so there's a little girl I talk about who I first met when she was 7, who was in a wheelchair and couldn't read and wasn't able to communicate, she had verbal dyspraxia, who subsequently learned to read through signing, and through her increased kind of sense of self-efficacy as she began to read, she became more valued and noticed within the school, and ultimately she learned to walk. And it was that sense of nobody could measure her. Nobody could measure even if it had been a desirable thing to do. Nobody was able to predict what she was capable of. So she was genuinely an open book. And so that's one example of somebody that I just learned so much from Claudia. I just learned so much from her because before I started working with her, I only worked with her 3 hours a week, but I was really worried that I might break her. I mean, I'd never worked with a child with that level of special need before, and I felt quite daunted. I mean, it wasn't just that I wasn't sure that I could teach her to read, because I'd never really taught anybody to read. It wasn't just that. It was more that, how was I going to do it? Because she couldn't speak. But actually, as soon as I met her and her teaching assistant, I realised that she was just so full of life and joy, and she was overjoyed to have her own teacher. I mean, she was just brimming with she got this huge, great big smile. She could sign, she'd go like this. She could let you know if she didn't like something, and she could ask why. That was all the language that she had, sort of spoken language, but she could communicate so well, and she looked into your soul almost. Brilliant experience working with her. I learned so much. And it wasn't supposed to be about me learning, but then I think it is one of those processes that when you work with somebody and they start to kind of unfold a bit like a flower, you learn from them, and you learn the things that you can do that can really help them to grow still further. And then you can take that learning and apply it elsewhere. And, hopefully, so many of the children I work with, they don't have the level of difficulty that Claudia had, physical difficulty. But nevertheless, the learning that took place for me was always about never write anybody off, never assume that learning is fixed. Always keep the door open.
Absolutely. And I think that's an important point, because with initial teacher training, I lecture on an initial teacher training course, and it's very difficult. Inclusion gets a very small amount of time in the whole course, which is difficult. But and as you say, when you're working with adults and supporting other teachers, you can do all the writing and you can kind of give the strategies and everything. But you're right, it's that moment where you're faced with a child and you connect with them that you start to really learn what those strategies mean, or how they can operate, or how they need to be implemented in different ways. And then you just pick up little snippets of pedagogy, if you want to call it that, or, you pick up those snippets and add them to your toolbox. And so inclusion then becomes a series of possibilities, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think of inclusion as every child I work with. And in fact, all the teachers I work with. And it's interesting that we've now moved to this notion of quality first teaching. I think we should have had quality first teaching all the way along the line. So when I'm talking with colleagues at the Chartered College, I'm talking about how can we create classrooms where possibilities are endless? How can we create classrooms where children are able to show us what they're able to do and can keep on challenging themselves? So it's for all children, and it's also for all teachers and support staff. You know, it's so many colleagues that I meet across the profession are so inspired and want to do a good job, but they feel constrained in all kinds of different ways, and they feel like, well, I'm not allowed to do this, that, or the other thing. No, actually, professionals are incredibly free to be very, very responsive within their classrooms, and the way that we look at our children, the way that we make decisions about what our children are capable of achieving, it impacts all of our pedagogy. So if you as a teacher go into a classroom and you've been given a set of data, and then you look at all the children and mark the names up against the register and look, well, who are the ones who are my high flyers, and who are the ones that are going to need support, and so on and so forth. If you start from that premise, then you're already starting from a deterministic view that says there's only so far I can take these children. Whereas if you come at it from a position of saying, this is where the children are right now, but together, working in a spirit of co-agency, with every child working together with the teacher, all of us contributing, highest expectations. I really trust you to learn. I really trust that we're going to do amazing things together. Then suddenly you create a climate of opportunity, a climate where even the children who've been told by other people, either explicitly or implicitly, that they're never going to make it very far, will start to sort of sit up and think, well, actually, maybe today's the day that I can do the work that's previously only been given to the Eagles groups. Perhaps today I don't have to be a hedgehog.
Yeah.
Because
yes. No, you're right. And in fact, partly there are some structures in the system that make it very difficult for some teachers to do that. I know, for example, in our high schools, our secondary schools, when it comes to exam entry at GCSE, some of the boards have kind of levels, and if you go into a lower level stream, the highest you can achieve is I forgot what the numbers are at the moment, like a C. And but to do that apparently is a more secure way of just gaining that pass than risking, going in one of the higher levels and not doing well. And instantly then we're dividing children, limiting where they might go. Bob.
So it's absolutely fascinating. And I was making some notes, Alison, on what you were saying, and I was going to ask you a question which you started to answer. And it was this idea of constraint and how limited some teachers feel their pedagogy has to be limited because of, for example, the assessment framework or inspection regimes. And whilst you were talking, Alison, I was thinking back to my own practice and some of the more outlandish things, which I have to confess I quite routinely did. And I was reflecting on, well, why did I, whilst I was teaching rivers, make the whole class stand up and push all of the tables to make the shape of the riverbed and then turn the pupils into the water? Why did I do that? Well, it's because I was trying to teach them effectively. Why did I turn my classroom into the United Nations and refuse to talk to any child in a normal way? I was in role. I was the president of the United Nations, and they knew they had to turn up. And whilst I was reflecting on what you were saying, Alison, I realized that actually, thinking back on it, that was some of the most inclusive teaching, because it helped absolutely every child in class be able to access the work. And if I could just ask you and frame this as, I see many people in the teaching profession feel, for me, an artificial constraint about how they can and should teach because of frameworks, assessment frameworks, and, as I say, the inspection regime. I personally never felt that way because I was trying to concentrate on what it is to be an effective teacher. And if I was being effective, hopefully they were able to learn and fulfill their potential. And therefore, surely the assessments will look after themselves, and the inspectors, whoever they might be, would recognise the achievement of all of the learners. But what's your view on, are we really constrained?
So I guess my view is that I would have been a similar teacher to the kind of teaching that you're talking about. I think, but that doesn't mean that you don't combine that with direct instruction. It doesn't mean that you're not setting out the parameters of what it is that you're wanting the children to learn through the experience that you're offering, and being able to articulate, this is why we're doing this, and or afterwards, this evaluating what have we done and what did we learn from doing this, and what can we apply from the activity that we've just engaged in. I think it's just trying to make sure that we close that loop all the time. So being a teacher is such an art. It's an art and a science. I think we've had a really strong focus in the last number of years on cognitive science and what we can learn about the methodology of teaching. And I've even heard people saying, oh, we don't need to worry about engagement anymore. Well, of course we do. We need to worry that we need to take everybody with us on the journey. And whatever you need to do to take the children on the journey and give them the optimum experience, it strikes me that's what you need to do as a teacher. There is, however, an increasing focus on what does the quality of the output look like in the books? Are the books immaculate? Do the books have beautiful diagrams and, all these kind of things? Now, for some children, creating a beautiful book would be their idea of an absolute nightmare. And I'm being, quite sort of stereotypical, I guess now, but I can think of a particular lad that I taught when I was teaching year 5-6. He has now got a doctorate from the University of Cambridge. He's a physicist. I met his mother a number of years ago at the Royal Academy. He's doing brilliantly. But his handwriting was the worst handwriting that I've ever seen. I mean, I did sort of say to him, well, you're obviously going to become a doctor in the future because you've got all the prerequisites. But for him, it was almost physically painful for him to write. And if he would, if he finally wrote something, a couple of lines would be the most that you would get from him. But engage that lad in conversation. Ask him about his ideas, about what he was thinking about, what was being taught, about what he felt about the theory of anything that we were being taught about. And he could speak very, very fluently and with real knowledge about whatever it was that we were talking about in a primary classroom at that time. But what he couldn't do was, and I think probably he thought it was a bit irrelevant, really, because he got it all up here. Why do I need to put it on a page? Why do I need to write it down? Now, a child like that with an underconfident teacher working now might well think, actually, I've got to discipline him because he needs to produce half a page of writing with a diagram that I can then make sure is beautifully framed and presented to my head teacher or whoever it is that's scrutinizing my books. Otherwise, I will have failed. And as soon as you start to put that kind of pressure on that sort of learner, you take all of the joy away from the learning. It wasn't that I was prepared to let him write nothing, but equally asking him to write for hours, which was like, it was like blood coming out the end of his fingers, wasn't going to be productive, was it? So that we need to recognize that all our learners are not the same. They don't all come from the same starting point, that they won't all have the same end point, but that the journey needs to be one where they can flourish.
John, you wanted to pop in.
I did. First of all, I wanted to empathise with that lad in that I have appalling handwriting. It wasn't until I did a master's that my handwriting was not taken into account in the exams. Yeah. And the other thing is pages of sums. I knew how to do it on the first one, so why do I have to do 50? Yeah. And I, but that wasn't what I was coming in for, really. And I love what you're saying, Alison. But what it makes me fear, really, is that we are in a system that is itself exclusive. Because for me, the education system is there for its own purposes, not for the children's purposes. It's there to get the numbers that the system requires the system to get. Yeah. And I suppose that the question, and I also think that most teachers think the same way as you do and feel the same way as you do. And then all of us enter a system and contribute to it. We don't break out of it. And we recognize all those children are different, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're able to then treat them differently, teach them differently, recognize those differences because of the demands of that system. Now, is that too cynical a view?
Well, it's probably quite a realistic view, but I also, you know, I'm an optimist. So I think the teachers that teach with heart will always try and find a way through for their children. So they, you know, they will do what they feel they need to do to kind of keep everybody at bay in terms of being monitored or whatever it may be. But I would like to think that there would be an opportunity for children like that little lad to be able to break out and do other things within the curriculum where he could be celebrated for what he was capable of. I think the art of being a teacher is to get the best out of all of your students. And when you can see that some of the things that, you know, maybe you're required to do and they're required to do are tedious beyond belief, it's about how do we kind of do a bit of this and then find something else that we can do that we
Yes,
can do that will bring the joy back. And we have to have joy in our classrooms. You know, if our schools are not joyful places, it's no wonder we've got attrition of teachers. It's no wonder that we've got poor attendance in schools post-pandemic, because actually, if you're learning at home with a computer, you can take yourself off and make a cup of tea when you want to, and you can come back to it when you feel ready to learn and so on. You don't have to be part of a herd of 30, and you don't have to sit on an uncomfortable seat with a draft because the window doesn't shut or whatever it is. You know, potentially you can be learning more effectively if you're away from home. And there were youngsters who really didn't like being, never really liked being in school, never really liked being amongst their peers. And suddenly, when they were learning from home, began to flourish in a way that they would never have done in school. But, you know, there's been very little sympathy for those youngsters who found remote learning more conducive, very little sympathy. Certainly from the DfE, it's been a case of get them back into school. And I was part of a meeting where they were, you know, scratching their heads saying, what can we do to improve attendance? And I had hoped, and I certainly put my point across, but I'm not sure it was listened to at all. I was hoped that a greater flexibility could be introduced into the system for some of our youngsters who may well find themselves, when in school, actually ending up in an isolation room because they couldn't cope with being in a busy classroom or being pushed around on the corridor by some of their unkind peers, in a way that they could actually manage their learning better remotely. So I think we lack imagination sometimes, and it's particularly our children who are unique in their learning that we almost feel like, I think the system feels like, well, they need to learn to comply, they need to learn to be like everybody else because we can't cater for individual difference. Well, the world is full of different people. We need to be, I think we should be catering for individual difference and celebrating other ways in to enable success.
Absolutely. Bob, you wanted to come in.
Yes, and hallelujah, Alison, with what you were saying there. If I can draw us back to a very central thought about inclusion, and that's the role of technology. And I'm very privileged in my role that I get to go and visit all sorts of different schools in all different parts of the country. And I have seen phenomenal practice this year, particularly this year, whether that's the use of technology to help Ukrainian students immediately access the curriculum and achieve their potential immediately, or all sorts of, whether it's just live subtitling that the teachers thoughtfully just put on to help not just an individual, but actually a whole range of learners that at different times may find that helpful. But then I met a head of computing this week that is using offline worksheets because everyone has to record for Ofsted the evidence of their learning. A head of computing. For you, Alison, what role does technology play on helping the profession be truly inclusive?
Well, it's just another way of opening up the world, isn't it, from the classroom? I mean, we had, when I was a head teacher, we we had a box arrived into school, and it was when there was money in education. So there was a box, and it was a box that was encouraging speaking and listening. So it was an extension of the National Literacy Strategy. Some people may remember it. This huge box arrived, and it was supposed to be leading. We were using videos and things from it to lead staff meetings to encourage high quality talk amongst our children. And of course, I mean, I really, really believe in the importance of oracy. But I remember at this particular staff meeting, and we were sort of looking at, what we're going to do. And I said, why don't we think about other ways we could encourage talk in a really meaningful way? And we came up with the idea of developing a radio station across the school. And we had a central radio sort of station in the corridor that went through the whole of the school. And then there were speakers in different classrooms, and we encouraged the children to make radio. Children who wouldn't necessarily be the ones who would flourish through written work could nevertheless be great DJs or commentators, or read the football report from the latest match, when in a way they might not have been incentivized to read otherwise because they were going to be on the radio. So I think technology just gives us the opportunity to open up worlds. And then you've got the whole kind of prospects of virtual reality, extending imaginative play, taking you to places where you could, you're sitting in a classroom, but suddenly you're not in the classroom, you're in you're in a cave or whatever it might be. It's just, the imagination is endless. And I think technology gives us the opportunity to extend that beyond the classroom.
Thank you. Just following on from that, one of the issues for me is this whole debate about should kids or should they not be using technology? And no, I never ask anybody if I can use a computer for the job I need to do, or open the phone on my camera, or whatever it is. I just know the job I need to do, and I reach for the tool to do the job. And yet somehow in schools, teachers are for me anyway, too often the gatekeepers to how a child responds to what tools they're using. And I'm not sure how we get beyond that.
I think the fear in schools, which I can understand, is the fear of social media intrusion. So yes, most youngsters have got a mobile phone that has got capacity to do all kinds of things, but it's also got the capacity to ping something across your screen that says, I hate you. I don't like what you're wearing today. Who do you think you are? And some very addictive facets of technology, which are really hard to resist. So I used to have a BlackBerry phone. Anyway, and the BlackBerry has a little red light that flashes on it. So if I was talking to you now and my BlackBerry, I don't have a BlackBerry anymore, so you're safe. But if I had a BlackBerry next to my laptop and the red light started to flash, even though I'm in the middle of an interview, I would still be tempted to kind of go, I'll just have a look and see what's that's come in. So, adults, children, we're all the same. We're just grown up children. So I think the things that get in the way are those kinds of interruptions. On the other hand, if there's a way in which we can quieten those interruptions, and we can use the technology that we have, whether it's to create a digital portfolio, whether it's to take photographs of work that we've been doing when we've been working in a group, to stop that whole idea that you've got to fill in a written worksheet instead of using the blessed computer, then hallelujah, let's do that. It's just the kind of interruption from social media. I can understand if you've got a class of 30, are they listening to you, or are they on TikTok?
Yeah.
How we prevent that, how we prevent that.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, in my kind of personal view is, obviously I love technology. Obviously I wouldn't do the job I do. But for example, when I'm driving, I don't let my phone sync Bluetooth to the car, and I put my phone and my handbag in the boot of the car, which means that should somebody phone, there is no option, I can't speak to them. And my boss at the time when I got my first car that had a Bluetooth thing said, oh, lovely, I'll be able to speak to you on your way to work. And I thought, well, that's not very sensible, is it? And so it's about how we manage things. And I visited a school where the one up from reception, year one, it was year one, but the children had additional needs. And around the classroom, it wasn't mobile phones, but there were some iPads lying around. There were some old-fashioned cameras, digital cameras. There were voice recorders lying around. And what happened was, at various points, I heard the teacher say, or an adult say, do you know, what you're doing there is really interesting. Do you want to just record that? And the child would go up and choose whether to pick a voice recorder up and make a little, I did this and this is what I've done, or take a photo of it and then trot it over and upload it. You know, and they were learning how to do it themselves. It wasn't a TA going around taking a photo bit of work, or a teacher having to do it all on catch up. And I think maybe there's a big argument, isn't there, about keeping the early years kind of technology pure and having nice wooden things and outside in mud kitchens. But you know what? Technology is part of everything. If we teach children to manage it from being little.
I agree completely. And if we get the culture right, if the culture's right across the school, then in fact, you know, I think you can trust children to have mobile phones and use them, because why would you use anything other than the most up-to-date technology? You would use that technology to enhance your learning. It's just about getting the culture right. And that's about, you know, how everybody just needs to know that when we're working in school, a bit like when you're driving to work, we're not engaging in one-to-one communication with others, because unless that's part of what we're supposed to be doing. I just think I can understand why there are challenges there.
So can we just have a think about initial teacher training and new entrants to the profession, and not particularly to talk about the whole digital native side of things, but to think specifically about the training and the various frameworks on offer for new entrants to the profession. And I have a growing but quite long-standing concern that in many respects it's really rather superficial in many respects. And when I see, for example, let's say a primary school teacher, how much time they will get thinking about particular parts of the curriculum for which they may not have expertise, an obvious, but there are plenty, an obvious one to think about is the music curriculum, for example. And I just wondered if we could just explore the implications of that within an inclusive context, because it isn't just about how can we help those new entrants to the profession, which I understand it's become in some respects even more onerous, that initial stage when you're in a school. Once you've got your first appointment, there's various things you need to do in terms of your qualification, but it's also about those that need to manage, help and support those new entrants to the profession as well, knowing that a newly qualified initial teacher training, you know, hasn't had depth on many aspects, and yet bang, here we go, expectations are sky high at school.
Well, I'm going to have to be careful you don't get me into trouble through this podcast, but I think so there's a very rigorous core content framework that initial teacher trainees now have to go through. It leaves very little space for individual initial teacher educators to put anything in around the edges. But the reality is, I think, I understand the aspirations of why this program has been introduced, why initial teacher educators are being assessed and all the rest of it. I understand the aspiration because presumably the idea is, well, I'm sure the idea is, you know, the best possible input that we have very, very early on in the career means the best possible chance of teachers being able to stay within the profession and flourish. I think there's a fatal flaw, though. And the fatal flaw is that when you leave university, or when you take the decision to come into teaching and you begin your teacher training course, you have to learn so much about who you are in terms of you in front of a group of children. And there is so much information coming from the university, coming from the school, coming from the children, your first chance of engaging with running a classroom with a teaching assistant, all kinds of things. I think actually, to use the parlance, there is a real risk of cognitive overload. So it's not until later on, maybe in your second or third year, that you can nuance your practice, that you can begin to look around and think, oh, what else can I do? What else can I find out? Who else can I look to give me more support? the amount that one is expecting trainee teachers to assimilate, especially if they're only doing a 1-year course, is really difficult. It's a really difficult experience. If we think back, all of us, to our first experience of training to teach, I mean, I just remember kind of running from one thing to the next and trying desperately to fulfill everybody's expectations. Now, being able to then overlay that with all kinds of nuance about this is how the brain works, this is what we need to do to optimize learning, plus this is all the subject knowledge you need to develop, and oh, by the way, this is where you need to stand, and this is how I actually think that and this is why I lead the Chartered College of Teaching. I think the job of being a teacher is a lifelong learning experience. And if we have schools that are kind places where teachers can support each other and have the time and capacity to support each other, the new colleagues come in, they're full of great ideas, they're full of enthusiasm. We work with them instead of judging them to enable them to be able to contribute, but we also support them. So the teacher that hasn't got any knowledge of technology that could be brilliant to support music teaching is shown it by somebody who is doing it in their class, and they're saying, look, this is fantastic, you could try this. So rather than being sort of siloed and being expected to perform and get on with it, you join a benign learning community as a teacher coming into a school, and as part of communities, connecting with communities, then the Chartered College is a professional body that supports all of that alongside your local authority or alongside other schools in your mat, wherever the situation you are. You can't be expected to assimilate everything you need.
No.
In that first year, I don't think.
I think the Chartered College is stepping up to. It's really increasing in people being aware of it and what it offers and the support it gives. Well, certainly, from my perspective, absolutely certainly. I definitely mention it to the little group of trainees that I have very small input to. John, just before you jump in, I just wanted to say something about the bewilderment that we all felt when we started teaching. We were running. And I can remember coming into the staff room of the very, very strict school I taught in Scotland on the beginning of my 3rd year. So I'm like now 2 years in, and I remember walking in thinking, I've got this job sussed. And because I was in a little school in Scotland, the ladies' staff room, the men's staff room was separate down the same corridor. And Alison, I had to knock on the door of the men's staff room to ask a question. I wasn't allowed to go, oh, you couldn't wear trousers. I mean, I am that old. And but I can remember jauntily walking in thinking, here we are, beginning of a new year, ready to go. And a lady towards the end of her career, who was actually one of the biggest influences on me, looked at me and said, well, you're happy, aren't you? And I said, oh, yeah, I'm really pleased to be back. And she said, and you think you know what you're doing? And that floored me. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, beginning of year 3. And she said, I won't be here towards the end of your career, but look back on this day and remember how little you actually knew. And I felt like I'd been slapped nicely, but slapped. And I haven't forgotten her words, and she was exactly right. And now we're going to John.
Thank you. And the other thing you didn't mention, Alison, was bursting into tears. I don't think I've met a teacher who hasn't cried in their first year.
Oh, yes, Thursday nights.
Yeah. But what I was going to say was going back to this question of teacher training. One would simply be let's look at Finland, and it's a master's level profession. But the other thing was actually whether we can teach an attitude. So one would be that we are lifelong learners. And so that expectation that we are responsible for our own professional development, and we should be looking to continue to develop. We are never the finished product. And the other one is, you mentioned quality first teaching. Well, the essence of that is that we are all teachers of children with SEND. We're all responsible for inclusion. And so it's not the TA that does it. It's not the specialist teacher. It's that attitude that I think needs to be picked up in that first year. And yeah,
I mean, I completely agree. I completely agree. I think there are some really core things that do need to be thought about in that first year, and they are to do with your professionalism, you know, the role that you have in your classroom. The research that I've done is around learning without limits, about, you know, never writing anybody off, all these things we've already talked about. I think those principles, you know, if I get the opportunity and when I'm invited in to speak to university students, I talk to them about that in the context of join your professional body, join the chartered college, but do it because you want every child to thrive. And I think those are messages that actually it is why people come into teaching. They come into teaching because they want to make a difference. They still do, and it's wonderful that they do, and we must not knock it out of them. And too often what happens is it does get knocked out of them because there are other demands that are more quantifiable, and you know, actually you're never going to meet that demand of making a difference because you can't quantify it, and every child that you make a difference for, there will be some other children that you haven't got to yet today or this week or this month. So that's a lifelong, career-long aspiration. But I do think talking about what it means to be a professional, I've started introducing this to colleagues. I mean, I was this week, I was talking to executive leaders and MAT CEOs, and we had the conversation around what's professionalism, because no one else is talking about it. And actually we need to talk about it. We need to understand it right the way through, from those very earliest days, right the way through to the point where we're leading a group of schools. Are we doing that with a moral intent? Are we leading with heart? Are we making sure that we never write any child off? You know, are we holding on to those ethical values that we need, those ethical principles, those Nolan principles of public life? You know, are they things that drive us? It's really important when you start talking about inclusion. I genuinely think it is about every single child that you encounter, regardless of their needs at the moment. That's our responsibility, I think.
Alison, that's just a perfect stopping point. You've given a set of questions to challenge the people who are listening to this, because we need to challenge where we are now and what's right and what's working well now and what we're not getting right still. You know, and you've highlighted a lot of those things. And then that final set of questions is lovely. So I want to give you two thank yous, if you don't mind. First of all, a thank you on behalf of LGfL, and in particular, Bob, John and I, for joining us for this podcast, because we do really, really appreciate your time. But also a thank you for the Chartered College, because I know how instrumental you are in what it offers and how it reaches out. And I just see it going from strength to strength at the moment. And so I wish you continued success, you and everybody else. And thank you for supporting the profession.